evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock. Welcome to a League of Women Voters Candidates Fair for State, House, and Senate candidates. I am Robin Wisdom with the League of Women Voters of Umpqua Valley, and I will be your moderator tonight. The League's mission is to provide unbiased and nonpartisan voting information so that you can make informed choices. Please check our website for more information. That's lwvuv.wordpress.com. We have voters guides, printed hard copy voters guides available there on the table up here and back by the coffee, tea, and water. They're also online at lwvor.org. And a few housekeeping details. The bathrooms are through these doors or through this door, both men and women's, down and around the corner. And there's coffee and tea and water available in the back. And about tonight, we have 4 candidates here in the Oregon House Districts 2 and 7 and Oregon Senate District 1. State Senate terms are 4 years long in Oregon, and representative terms are 2 years long. And they all take office on the second Monday of January 2019. Thank you, candidates, for being here and engaging with the voters. We will do things a little differently this time. There will be no closing remarks by the candidates or questions from the audience. Instead, at the close, we ask that the candidates and constituents meet in various parts of the room. You may ask your questions then. We have reserved the room until 9 p.m. Alice Lackey is our timekeeper. She will assist us with watching the time, and she'll show us her cards. And we'll start with a self-introduction by each of the candidates that is 2 minutes long per person. And please tell us about yourself, why you're running, and don't forget to hold that mic up close to your mouth. Our mission is to inform voters. Our theme tonight is what's going right and how could things be better. Tonight's topics that will be addressed in this order: the economy, education, healthcare, and natural resource management. Each speaker will have 4 minutes to address each topic one at a time. After that, speakers will be available in the audience to answer questions from their constituents. And we will begin with House candidates. Let's start with whoever is on the outside. How about Ms. Salter? Would you like to begin?
Sure.
Yes, 2-minute intro, please.
Good evening. My name is Megan Salter, and I'm running for State Representative District 2. I am running because we deserve someone who is committed to representing everyone in our district, who is committed to delivering results for our area, and who understands that our community is stronger when all voices are at the table. My background is in education. I spent time teaching in Head Start preschools, I worked in special education, and I spent several years as a preschool teacher. Now, as a mom of 2 children, I am increasingly concerned about the lack of funding in our public schools and the lack of opportunities in our area. It's time that we address these issues. It's time that we provide an economy with living wage jobs, affordable housing, and quality education. For the last 6 years, I have been volunteering right here in our local community. After the libraries closed, I collaborated with a group to help open the community bookshelves over at Cascadian Coffee. I spent a few years as a Girl Scout leader, and I spent 3 years running the Booster Club at my daughter's school. In that time, we were raising funds for art, music, PE, and even new curriculum. Currently, I serve on the Battered Persons Advocacy Board to help survivors of domestic violence, and I am also proud to say that I am working on Roseburg's very first tiny home community. For the last 6 months, I have been attending multiple events every week and knocking on doors so I I can hear what your concerns and your ideas for our area are. I am here to listen, I am here to collaborate, I am here to deliver results and represent everyone in our area. I will be the bridge for our unique issues here in rural Oregon and those in power in Salem. I will be the effective voice that we need in Salem so we can collaborate and build the future together.
Thank you. We'll move on to Senate candidate.
Good evening, and thank you, volunteers with the League, for organizing and producing this event. My name is Shannon Souza. I was raised in Browns Point, a historic lighthouse community on the Puget Sound in Washington State. I arrived here 23 years ago on an 18-month assignment with Weyerhaeuser Company and fell in love with it, stayed, and raised my 2 sons. I'm an engineer and a contractor, co-founder of a public school, 2 art and education-based nonprofits. I'm a special ops K-12 guest teacher in math, science, music, and the arts. I sit on the boards of the Professional Engineers of Oregon, Oregon Solar Energy Industry Association, and I'm on the Coos Bay School District Bond Oversight Committee. I also participated in the focus groups for the recent Coos and Curry housing studies and have continued on the implementation team for the Coos housing plan. I want to be your senator. I have a vision of a resilient and thriving Oregon. At the heart of that vision is a strengthened and supported working force. This workforce must be supported and strengthened through investments in educational pathways directly into today's living wage jobs, in employment-assisted daycare, and supported with access to affordable housing, healthcare for all, vibrant ecosystems, and robust infrastructure for communications, transportations, public safety, and drinking water supply. For the past 20 years, I've guided all of my endeavors with a mission to support strategic growth, responsible development, and sustainable living. It is that same mission I would like to carry forth to Salem. The upcoming legislative session offers tremendous transformative potential as we update our economic, ecologic, and educational systems, adapting to unprecedented rates of change in our technology, society, and climate. My visionary collaboration and the breadth of my regional experience would serve us well.
Thank you. Let's go to Cedric. House District 7.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This is my second League of Women's Voters opportunity to debate. Really enjoyed the one up in Cottage Grove, and now we had the opportunity to be here in Roseburg. Good showing here tonight. The other person I'd like to thank is my wife. Excuse me. It's my daughter's birthday. And tonight we had bouncy houses and a whole bunch of stuff planned, and so I had to sheepishly ask my wife if she would move the birthday party to tomorrow night, and she did. So I'm grateful for her for doing that. Another reason I want to be here is I feel like my job as a legislator is to represent all the constituents in House District 7, so I'm probably the only one here that has the opportunity not to only talk about what we want to do, but what we've done in the past. So I'm going to concentrate a little bit on some of the bills that I've done. Got elected in 2014 and started serving in 2015, and one of the bills that came before the House floor was toxic-free kids. My wife and I have raised 7 children. 3 of them are still in the house. One of them is a developmentally disabled girl, our daughter. And toxic-free kids kind of struck a chord with me. It was something that I felt we really ought to know what's in that. I was cross-party lines and I supported that. Senate Bill 1571 was Melissa's Law. In Oregon, we had 4,902 rape kits that were sitting on the shelves that were not tested yet. We put money into that, and we were able to get those up to date now. And in 2018, we went back and re-supported another bill that allows us to track that. ABLE accounts. I was a chief co-sponsor with Sarah Gelser on ABLE accounts that allows savings for disabled children to be put away for their better life experience. Pay equity bill. I supported the pay equity bill. I supported the anti-racial profiling bill. And I'm proud to say that I supported the Medical Leave Act so parents on maternity could continue their health care with their job. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Inskip, please. House District 7.
Thank you. My name is Christy Inskip. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see your faces. So I grew up in the country on a farm. My dad was a farmer, a small business owner, a mechanic, and my mom was a teacher's aide until she went back to school and became a registered nurse. My grandpa was a sheriff, and my other grandpa was a farmer, and I had another grandpa that worked for the railroad. So that's my background. You know, I grew up in a working family, and today I'm part of a working family. I live in Cottage Grove with my husband, Eric, my husband of 16 years. Although I've never held an elected position, I have served my communities as a passionate, hardworking, dedicated public servant for over 12 years. I've worked as the Tobacco Prevention Coordinator at Lane County Public Health for nearly 6 years, protecting our children from tobacco addiction. And during my public health career, I've worked to ensure transparency, to make sure that taxpayer funds were spent responsibly and only on things that worked. So I am running to make sure that everyone's interests are represented in the Capitol. We need elected officials who have more in common with us, who listen to the needs of the people they represent. And I want to fight for regular folks. I want to fight for us in the Capitol and make sure our interests are heard and not special interests. I will work to support jobs and small business by creating family wage jobs, investing in our local small businesses, and looking for responsible ways to rebuild our infrastructure. I will work to improve our public school system by increasing access to early childhood education, expanding career and technical education. I will also work to increase access to quality, affordable health care here in our rural communities. And I want to help lower prescription drug costs. In the legislature, I will fight for our fair share for our rural communities and represent the interests of us, constituents, not special interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll start with our 4 subjects. We'll start with one at a time. And maybe, again, it's the economy, education, healthcare, and natural resources. So we'll devote 4 minutes to each subject, and we'll start with Shannon. Pardon me, would you speak to the economy now in 4 minutes?
Okay.
Your view.
Would you like me to stand or?
That would be best, I think.
Since March, I've been touring the district. Senate District 1 has pieces and parts of 5 counties. I reside up in the northwestern corner of the district in Coos County, and the regional economist for Coos, Douglas, and Curry counties, her office is 5 blocks from mine, which is very handy. That's the predominant population base. So it's those are the numbers that I'm kind of thinking about as I'm touring around the district and talking to the economic developers, those that are serving the needs of those who haven't been able to engage in the economy through public health and health, human services, our educators, those types of people. And what we're seeing is that the existing and emerging economies of District 1 are completely thwarted by a lack of workforce. We have these economies that would like to just flourish and blossom, but cannot. Specifically, healthcare, education, building trades, and manufacturing even. So if we can leverage our focus at that workforce development piece, then all of the economy can flourish, and it can bring up those that are not currently engaged. We have some unique problems, particularly in the more rural communities. There's an increasing amount of generational poverty. We look at 18 to 48% poverty rates in our communities. And if that doesn't frighten you, if you feel that you're prosperous and secure in your shelter and your access to food and communications, remember that the security of your prosperity is only as secure as the prosperity of those around you. And it behooves all of us to lift everyone up and engage as many people as we can in the vibrant, sustainable economies that we have here. So through leveraging those public investments in things like Head Start for that life skills development, I mentioned employment-related childcare. We have parents that would like to jump in the game and contribute, but they can't. By the time they go to work for minimum wage and find someone to care for their children, they're losing traction. So there's an easy fix that we can propel more people into the workforce immediately. We have some real opportunities in the upcoming legislative session. We're going to be looking at entering into a carbon-based market. So that is going to shift one way or the other, actually in many ways, how our economy and our environment interact. And it holds the potential for us to be forethoughtful in our approach to those economies that we want to invest in for tomorrow. We're Americans, we're innovators. Everybody else replicates what we do. That's how it's always been. We're also out here on the frontier. We have this particular quality of survivalship. We've all experienced mega fires and floods and droughts, and we know who to contact and how to help each other regardless of what our political divides might be. Those are real strengths in this changing economic environment, so that we can look forward and calibrate our existing systems for our healthcare and our housing and our manufacturing to the new realities of our rapidly changing climate. And we can replicate and export the technology that we develop here in our own economy. So I think that my bottom line is I'm very excited and optimistic about the district, and I would really, really welcome the opportunity to move forward.
Thank you very much. Let's move to Mr. Hayden to talk about the economy.
Yeah, thank you. In Salem, I served on the Early Childhood and Workforce Development Committee, and we've talked about this subject a lot. And there's a economy that's metro-based in Oregon, and there's an economy that's rural-based, and the two need to be connected. We need to be able to connect through technology so that the internet, high-speed internet access is more available in rural counties like Douglas County, to where that we can work with the career technology education programs in our schools here, and they can utilize that. So we can be developing these technology jobs at the same time that we support the jobs here that we already have. In the workforce development, it's very critical that we do have, and I agree that we do have more technology in our schools. I think that's important to developing our economy. Now, voters passed a workforce development or education in technology measure. Unfortunately, our governor only funded that to a half measure. She is now saying that she'll come back and fund that to a full measure if she gets reelected. I was disappointed to see that we didn't have that technology support, that the voters said, we need this in our schools. We need our young men and women to be able to enter the workforce and to have the technology to work here at home, so they don't have to go to the more prosperous metropolitan areas where there is more technology jobs. So forest management is another thing that we really need to face with a different approach.
Well, we can talk about that in just a minute. We've got 4 more minutes for that.
I do have 2 more minutes, right?
Yes, excuse me.
So a lot of these, what we learn in Salem is a lot of these subjects overlap. And if we want to look at the economy, forest management, and I know it's another subject here, the forest management is an area that we can really look to not only help our environment, but to also help our economy. When we look at the wildfires that we have, and by the way, that is something that I do in my summers, spent over 60 days on the Southern Oregon fires, including the Klondike fire that we just heard this weekend is kind of raising back up and giving us problems. But as far as the management of that and the economy of that, there's a lot of opportunity. There's actually been federal dollars on the table that we have not, as Oregonians, through our political system, engaged with the Good Neighbor Act. There is starting to be growing pressure year after year as we have more bigger wildfires. And if we would just utilize that kind of Good Neighbor Act, which allows federal money to come to the state to do forest management, sustainable forest management, we can actually improve the health of our children, particularly those with asthma, year after year after year when they get exposed to these large fires. It's a health problem. It's just not a forest management problem. Allied Health College in Roseburg, to have a more local, there's been something that I've supported for an Allied Health here. That will help our economy. It will also bring the education up. When we talk about Allied Health, we're talking about not a medical school or a dental school. My background, I'm a dentist by trade. I work in a hospital up in Lane County. I've done that for 25 years. All of my practice is limited to the operating room. And so I'm familiar with that. What we need in the healthcare is everybody working at the top level that they can. So Allied Health, I'd really like to see that to come to Roseburg. And the second, or one other point quickly, because I'm running out of time for somebody that's in politics, 4 minutes is very short. The Roseburg Veterans Home, really want to push that forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Inskip.
So we all want a strong, thriving economy where we can support ourselves and our families. A strong economy with lots of good-paying jobs makes it easier to afford a good education, quality health care, quality housing, and to live comfortably. With the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, the middle class is growing smaller, the American dream seems further away than it has ever been. The problem is that our rural economies are not what they used to be, and our dollars don't go as far as they used to. Our communities are hurting. Since 1980, real wages, when adjusted for inflation, has actually stayed steady, but the cost of living has increased. We need to create more good-paying jobs, invest in our small businesses, rebuild our infrastructure, make sure that workers are supported fairly, support families with a paid family and medical leave insurance program, child care subsidies, workforce development, and ensure that we don't overburden our working families with unfair taxes. We need to create more family wage jobs. More importantly, we do not have enough jobs that pay enough to take care of a family. I've been all over the district. I've been knocking doors right here in Roseburg, and what folks are telling me is that jobs are one of their main concerns. We need to create high-paying jobs which stimulate the economy. It lets folks spend more money and creates tax revenue. You know, one of the things that people tend to forget is that raising income levels provides tax revenue without actually increasing the tax burden on individuals. We need to invest in and support our small local businesses. Instead of big tax cuts to large corporations, we should invest the economic development money into our small local businesses that struggle to get started and create vibrant communities. Having a few more successful small businesses improves our communities. We could really create jobs and drive our local economies by investing in our small businesses. We need to find responsible ways to rebuild our infrastructure. Rural Douglas and Lane counties have not been getting their fair share. And all the infrastructure shouldn't be in Eugene and Portland. These infrastructure projects will bring many higher, good-paying jobs to our communities and bring the infrastructure that we so desperately need. I will advocate to make sure that we get our fair share and the infrastructure projects that we need. We need to strengthen our families with a paid family and medical leave insurance program. The U.S. is the only developed country in the world that does not guarantee mothers paid time off. and is one of the only rich countries in the world that does not provide paid leave for other types of family care. No one should have to worry about losing their job or their income when they need to take care of themselves, a new baby, or a family member who is seriously ill. We also need to support workers. Jobs should have fair pay, fair benefits, and fair working conditions. We need to protect workers' right to form a union and collectively bargain. We need to make sure that after working hard their entire lives, people can retire with dignity. And workers are the backbone of our communities. They should be treated fairly. And we need to make sure the tax burden is not on the working families.
Thank you. Let's go to Ms. Salter.
The state of the economy in rural Oregon was really my catalyst to run for office. When my daughter started kindergarten, I joined the Booster Club at her school, and within a few months, I remember we were sitting around with the Booster Club, and we were talking about how we could really get the word out there about this ballot measure that we would be voting on to keep all of our schools in Roseburg open. Now, unfortunately, that bond failed. We closed down Rose Elementary School, and we saw class sizes increase at all of our other schools. It wasn't long after that I was standing in the crowded library community room listening to our elected officials talk about the potential for all of our libraries closing. And I remember thinking, what's next? If we don't diversify our economy, if we don't have a long-term plan, where are we in 5 years, 10 years, 25? For far too long, rural Oregon has been left behind. The urban areas are booming and southern Oregon counties are on the verge of bankruptcy. I am ready to fight for legislation in Salem that will improve our economy here in rural southern Oregon. The recent recession hasn't helped us here in our area either, and it forced a lot of our workers to leave this area for better opportunities, and they haven't returned, and so this has created a workforce shortage. We solve this by first investing in our communities through training programs in healthcare, clean energy, building trades, manufacturing. We do this by expanding our career and technical education programs and creating new pathways for our students and job training assistance programs for those at different stages in life as well. This trains our workforce in those valuable trade jobs that we do not have in our area. Plumbers, electricians, welders, and also for the jobs of the future in technology. In doing so, we not only solve our workforce shortage, but we help our access to health care in this area, and we help solve our housing crisis, which we are also suffering from. Next, let's partner businesses with our schools. My uncle was a high school teacher, and several years ago, he partnered up his local high school with local small businesses. And what they did was they taught students the skills that they would need. So once those students graduated, they were moving right into living wage careers. This also helped the businesses because they weren't having to constantly recruit and train new employees. Then I want to work on a more coordinated, regionally based economic development plan that ensures that Southern Oregon is at the table and we are not overlooked. By providing grants for businesses to move into our area and incentives for private investment, we can use this money for manufacturing, a manufacturing plant perfect for a recycling facility, which we so desperately need now on the West Coast. Or partner up hemp farms with manufacturing plants so that we are now producing textiles, rope, soap, and the list goes on with that potential. Locally, those grants and incentives can also help us prepare our infrastructure for the imminent earthquake that we are always being warned about. We know we need to be building pontoon bridges and preparing our dams so they don't collapse. Through all of this, we create new industry, we create new jobs, and then as our state revenue increases, we get to put that money back into the things that have been cut in these last several years, like education and public safety.
All right. Thank you very much. And now we'll begin our next round, and the subject is education. So let's begin with Mr. Hayden.
Thank you. Education is, I believe, one of the biggest challenges that we have in Oregon. And there's three basic categories to education: is preschool, K through 12, and then higher education. I've had the opportunity of serving on the higher education committee, and I've also had the opportunity of serving on the early childhood development committee, both of which I really enjoy. But what I've learned through this process in Salem is we really have three silos. Those higher education committee talks only about higher education. The preschool only talks about preschool, and the K through 12 talks about K through 12. I've been successful with a couple of measures and one bill that actually passed. What I'm trying to do is connect that in education. Those of us that look at education in Oregon, we know we're in the bottom few states. We are in the lowest categories across the U.S. in education. And I've looked at all 50 states and pulled a lot of data on that information. And the one thing that across all the states that I could really correlate statistically was absentee days. Oregon has a lot of absentee days. And on top of that, if you look at Oregon's school year, we have about 20 days less. We are the shortest school year in the nation. So if you add all of those days up, we end up having K through 11, not K through 12, because our students in Oregon only have the advantage of 11 years of education, not 12 years of education. That puts them at a disadvantage in the job market. So what do we do to fix that? We really got to take it from the early childhood and specifically looking at the individual education program. That's something dear to my heart. Have had several children go through that program, and working recently with my daughter, we call it the individual education program, and the program was to put her on a bus and bus her about 30 minutes to where she could be at a group place. To me, that's not an individual education. Yeah, it's cheaper, get them all together. My wife and I decided to skip that, and she we found a public charter school that allowed homeschool and a curriculum that we could purchase. And my wife and I can afford that, but not everybody can afford to purchase that curriculum. So individual education programs, to me, are the key to where we start for these children that are a little bit behind. They need a little help. And we're not talking about developmentally disabled in all cases. Some are, yes, and we want them to achieve the level that they can achieve. But if we don't really revamp our individual education program, I think that's the basis for a lot of our problems with that. Funding. We need good funding. I have advocated for additional funding for education. When we take our budget, we spend about $75 billion a biennium. When we are in Salem, we talk about $20 billion because that's the amount of money that we bring in that we can dedicate. The rest comes from other sources and federal government. We have increased our funding by 30% in education, but we haven't tackled some of the things that are really draining down. We've gone from $5.5 billion on the state side, doesn't count property taxes, to $8.2 billion state funding, but our PERS liability has increased to where it is taking dollars, taking teachers out of our classroom. We've got to get a handle on that.
Great. Next, let's go to Christy Inskip.
Thank you. Every child deserves the opportunity to grow up to lead a healthy, prosperous life. We all want an education system that works for our kids, that better prepares them for life in the workforce. We have the third worst high school graduation rates in the nation. That's unacceptable. We can do better. College is outrageously expensive, and we have a lack of other opportunities for students who are better working with their hands. We have a lack of career and technical education. For instance, I'll tell you that my husband, when he was a youth in high school, he was less academically inclined and better working with his hands. And he did better in the classes, in the career and technical education type classes where he was able to work with his hands. We need to prioritize education funding. Increase access to early childhood education, create K-12 opportunities, make college more affordable, and expand career and technical education. We need to prioritize education funding in the state budget. Funding education is one of the best investments we can make in our communities. A properly funded education gives our children a foundation for a healthy, prosperous future. And when they are able to enter the workforce, they're able to get good jobs, and it boosts our economy and improves our community. We need to increase access to early childhood education. When children attend early childhood education when they are very young, it helps level the playing field and it gives them better outcomes in life. It prepares children to enter school ready to learn. When children enter school ready to learn, they can succeed in school and successfully become the next generation of workers and citizens in our community. We need to ensure teacher, school employee, and student safety. Teachers and school employees, I have talked to a few and they're telling me that we have safety issues in the school for both the staff and the students. The issue is primarily, but not always, but primarily in special education. You know, my mom, I told you she's a teacher's aide. She actually worked mostly in special education. And she had situations where she was unsafe. And when I was a kid, I actually feared for her safety. No staff, no teacher, no child should feel that way at school. We need to create more K-12 opportunities. Curriculum needs to be well-rounded with a full restoration of courses and programs such as civics and art and music, science, physical education, early childhood education, health, mental health counseling, tutoring, libraries, career and technical education. You know, I went to an elementary school recently, a couple weeks ago, and was surprised to find out at their lack of offerings there. We also need to make college more affordable. In our changing world, we need to make sure that college is more affordable and accessible, and that it has offerings that prepare students to get those 21st century jobs. And we need to expand career and technical education. CTE creates opportunities for those who are better at working with their hands. These programs help better prepare young people for the higher paying jobs. It provides a higher skilled workforce for employers and helps our communities thrive economically.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Ms. Salter.
I come from a long line of educators and spent my entire childhood in my mom's special education classroom and my aunt's preschool, and even helped my cousin set up his first middle school classroom. So when I graduated high school and needed to decide what I was going to go work on for my degree, I decided on early childhood development. And while I was taking those courses, I also took a job as a one-on-one aide in special education, and then I went on and taught for several years in preschool. There was a school year where I was teaching at 2 different preschools. One was a privately funded preschool where the majority of students came from a home where only one parent worked, and those parents had the extra money available to invest in their children's education. The other 3 days of the week, I was working at a publicly funded Head Start preschool on a high school campus. Those students usually had parents that both worked, oftentimes more than one job. And the differences were drastic. And so I really began to see what a difference it made in those first few years of a child's education between a publicly funded school and a private school, when parents could afford to give their children that initial start to their education and their life. I saw firsthand what a difference that could make. At the private preschool, we were able to spend money on music and movement and art programs, and as well as all the precursors to reading and writing and math. And at the public school, we were barely making ends meet to prepare those kids for kindergarten. When we invest in our students at a young age, we aren't just investing in those first few years of education. We're also increasing their high school graduation rate. We're also increasing their success in life. Studies show that for every $1 spent in early education, the payoff is $6 later on in economic benefits. When it comes to education in elementary and middle and high school, we need to make sure that everybody is at the table for those decisions. We need to create a task force where teachers and parents and administrators are at the table from preschool all the way on up through college, so that we are making sure that we have long-term strategies and plans, so that we are investing in our students. For so long, we have been focused on testing metrics, and our budget has forced cuts in things like PE and music and art. My background in early childhood development and my time spent in the classroom has proved to me that when we are investing in PE and art and music, our students are improving in all of their core subjects as well as their overall well-being. We also know that not all students are going to go to college after high school, so we need to continue to push forward in our career and technical education and create alternative pathways for students in the vocational trade jobs, as well as in healthcare and in technology, because those will be the jobs of the future. Over the course of my campaign, I've reached out to several educators, parents, and recent high school graduates so I can hear their issues and their concerns in education. And I can't tell you how many spoke of the urgent need to solve the root cause of poor academics: poverty, healthcare, housing. When you are a high school student that doesn't know where you are going to sleep that night, it's awfully hard to be focusing on your education. We also must work toward an equitable education for all students, properly funding our special education as well.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Miss Souza.
So education. If I was queen and we had everything that we could envision, it would be holistic, it would be relevant, and it would be rigorous. I'm not a trained educator. I'm a parent who's an instigator, and out in Coos County, just as in Douglas, when my children were coming of age, I noticed that all of the arts and music programs were being removed from the public schools in the area. So I actually quit my job as a corporate employee for a Weyerhaeuser company and started my own business so I would have more time to get involved in education. Dabbled in homeschooling a bit, realized that we were so lonely, we wanted to find some more families, and what started as the idea of a collaborative homeschool kind of snowballed into a public charter school, and we didn't really know what we were in for, but we were successful in that endeavor, and that school is now 15 years old, and our teaching staff has recently unionized and organized. So happy to say that there is a path forward for public school innovation that is not on the backs of our teaching staff. So getting back to those thoughts about holistic education, when we think about holistic education, it's to educate the entire child. And so many times our teachers, particularly when we have that 18 to 48% poverty rate, are faced with children who have real emotional barriers to learning. The experiences that some of them have at home with substance abuse in the family and with trauma really are creating some barriers. So whatever programs we have to provide, there's an immediate barrier. So I believe that one of our first priorities should be integrated mental health and not at the responsibility of the teachers. I would really like to see our human services and our education budgets and services entwined quite a bit more. Once we have addressed that, then the young mind can open up. The relevancy. When the K through 8 that we opened as our kids were getting older, we thought, oh, how about a high school? We run a grant from Bill and Melinda Gates and the Meyer Foundation to look at effective public high schools in impoverished nations, or in impoverished communities across the United States. And what they find is that those schools that don't have these high dropout rates that we have, that the kids show up, it's because there's that relevancy. They want to be there. And that is based on community relationships. If we can strengthen the relationships between the business community that wants this happy, capable, healthy workforce to come out, meaningful, real, just boots on the ground relationships in terms of defining what the curriculum looks like and offering those workforce opportunities in the community, then those relationships are strengthened and the kids show up. If we look at our CTE programs and say, hey, how about building tiny houses? Our high school students could be building tiny houses. You bet they're going to show up. It's exciting and it's meaningful. So those CTE programs, not just spinning alone, but actually engaged into essential community services. In terms of how we make this happen, I see that there are so many wonderful private and nonprofit and complementary publicly funded institutions out there. Survival skills from the Oregon Hunters Association, civics with the League of Women Voters, community and neighborhood improvement days with the United Way of Oregon. Our retirees in our communities have so many skills to share, not to mention the veterans amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that completes the round about education. Now we'll move to healthcare and start with Christine Skip.
Thank you. Everyone should be able to see a doctor when they're sick. We shouldn't have barriers due to outrageous costs and lack of providers. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is not accessible in our rural communities. So I was out in Oak Ridge talking to folks, and I talked to one woman who told me about a friend of hers who, when she was pregnant, when she started going labor, her husband started driving her to the hospital in Springfield. Well, she didn't make it to the hospital and had to deliver the baby on the side of the road. That's because we don't have access to health care in our rural communities. We have outrageous healthcare and prescription drug costs. I talked to one woman that told me that she has kidney failure and she's on dialysis and she depends on the Oregon Health Plan. She told me that if Measure 101 wouldn't have passed and she would have lost her health care, she would have died. We can't let this happen to people. We need to increase access to quality, affordable health care in our rural communities, prioritize funding for the Oregon Health Plan, ensure transparency in the pharmaceutical industry, and reduce prescription drug costs. We need to prioritize the funding for the Oregon Health Plan and other services that provide healthcare services for our low-income Oregonians. People who cannot afford health insurance should still be able to access the care they need when they need it. And they shouldn't be put into debt the rest of their lives to get that care. It's often the people who are most vulnerable who need that care. We need to also address the primary care shortage in our communities. We need more primary care physicians in our rural communities. While we do need to assist people in obtaining health insurance, most people actually have health insurance now thanks to the Oregon Health Plan. But simply having health insurance does not guarantee access to health care. Here, most of House District 7 is actually called a health provider shortage area for primary care providers, mental health care providers, and dental providers. Even in areas where there is a primary care provider, there's still a lack of specialty care. We also have an issue where folks who have developmental disabilities or other factors that actually create barriers to navigating the healthcare system. One of the things we can do is explore creating incentives for doctors to practice in high-risk areas. For instance, we could look at forgive or paying off student loans if the providers serve in the rural areas with the highest need for a certain period of time. We also need to address how we train, recruit, and retain those physicians in our rural communities. We need to make sure that we have something to offer them so that they'll stay for us. We also need to look at telemedicine. Telemedicine provides a real opportunity, but we need the infrastructure in place in order to use it. It needs to have the right bandwidth. Telemedicine, public-private partnerships, and federal grants are all possible non-tax solutions that we can take advantage of to help increase access to healthcare in our rural areas.
Thank you. Let's go to Ms. Salter.
Oregonians are hardworking people that deserve to have affordable, accessible healthcare that they can actually use. We should be making sure that people have access to preventative care, that prescription drugs are affordable, and that pre-existing conditions, which so many of us have, are actually covered. We also need to make sure that Oregonians are not filing for bankruptcy because of a medical diagnosis or having to start a GoFundMe to pay for those bills. I myself have struggled with healthcare. At 19, I lost both of my parents, and due to losing both of them unexpectedly and suddenly, I was working 2 jobs and my health was suffering. I didn't have health insurance through them anymore, and neither job that I was working at offered health care. And so in just a matter of a few short months, I wound up in the hospital twice. And when I walked out those hospital doors, I had thousands of dollars in debt at 19 years old. My story isn't unusual, though. As I'm out knocking on doors and meeting people in this district, so many people have their own healthcare stories. That even though that they now have healthcare, they can't afford to use it because of high premiums and high deductibles. It's time that we work together to solve this crisis. In our area, the supply for healthcare providers cannot keep up with the demand for services. This shortage of doctors and other providers has created barriers to timely care, and it continues us on this path of being one of the least unhealthiest counties in the state of Oregon. Healthcare is expensive and inefficient, and in our rural areas, people struggle with finding and keeping a doctor or transportation to and from, which can sometimes be an hour each direction. So we need to recruit and retain providers. Currently, we are able to recruit providers through legislation that allows them deferred loan payments. But the problem is they don't stay. And the reason they don't stay is for all the things that we've been up here talking about tonight. It's because we don't have properly funded quality education. We don't have a sufficient amount of homes in our area. We don't have community services like libraries. Those are all things that we need to focus on so we have a community where doctors not only want to move to, but want to stay. The other thing is we need to work on legislation for telehealth, which would use technology to remotely provide care. This would be especially important in the most rural areas of this district, but also benefit specialty care, mental health, people with chronic health conditions, people suffering from substance abuse disorders. And lastly, we need to hold our pharmaceutical companies accountable, impose rate provisions ensure transparency on drug prices and on profit, and restrict drug price gouging. I'd also like to move forward with a medical facility downtown because that will also help us retain our healthcare providers here.
Okay, let's go to Shannon.
There are parts of this district where in Curry County you can't have a baby. True. Unfortunate, but true. Just in Curry County, and I don't know what the economics look like for the entire district, but about $72 million flow in healthcare benefits to the county that aren't spent in the county because they can't receive the services there. So when we talk about access to healthcare, there are many sides to that. There's the child, the mother, the retiree, the vet who physically needs access. They need proximity, a place that they can get to, transportation, and a way to get there. They need to be able to afford it. It has to be available to them. And on the other side, we need the people to provide the health care. Our population here is aging. The best thing that we can do to stabilize and to revitalize our economy is to retain, grow our own children into working families that want to live here, and attract and retain families from elsewhere, because we have to. We absolutely have to in order to build the houses and to take care of our population, old and young. There's kind of a paradox. We're looking statewide at a shortage of thousands, maybe 5,000 nurses by 2020. It's 4,600 or 6,400 that's flipped around in my head right now. That's a lot of nurses. Right now, 40% of the nursing hours in this district are being met by travelers. Not nurses who live here and pay the taxes here, but by travelers. There's money to be made in healthcare, and investing in educating and growing our own healthcare providers, as well as attracting those that are already licensed healthcare providers. Unfortunately, the paradox with the nurses, there's a ratio. There's one nursing instructor for 8 new nurses that are turned out. And both UCC and SWOC out on the coast have been able to effectively double their capacity to turn out nurses. The funny thing is that the requirements for the nursing instructor are such that they have to take at least a $40,000 a year pay cut to teach the nursing students that then turn out. So that's a really generous and wonderful giving person who decides to do that. And there are some potential legislative concepts kicking around to help us bridge that gap. The other thing is that those nursing students need beds for their practicum. So once we remove the barrier and figure out how to pay for more nursing teachers, then we need to increase the size of our beds in our facilities. And that's a good thing because we're hearing that we want more access to health care. So it's this chicken and the egg. And the opportunity that we have is, since it makes good business sense, there's money to be made, we know we can get private investment in a solution. Since it's good for society, it reduces our taxes on transportation by trying to move all around the district to acquire the health services we need. We can actually entice more people to stay in our beautiful rural communities and stay and age and live out their lives because they have that access to the health care that they so need. So I'm very optimistic there that all the players that need to be involved are very much interested, and we just need some strong legislative concepts to push forth.
All right, let's go to Cedric Hayden.
Well, healthcare is a very large topic. I was in Portland today at the State of the Health reform, the policy reform, and talked 45 minutes on a very small portion of healthcare. And so to grasp the whole idea of healthcare in 4 minutes is quite a challenge. But one of the things that I think we forget in healthcare, when we're trying to help our rural communities, we need good schools. We need good healthcare. We need a place, a facility that we can attract those teachers and those professionals to come and work. My background's in healthcare. I got into the legislature because of healthcare. My wife and I, as I exited out of the corporate side of healthcare, started a nonprofit, and we wanted to go do free dental work around the state just for fun. I enjoy doing that, and ran into a couple of municipalities in House District 7 that said, no, we're not going to let you treat that population. So my focus to go to the legislature was on healthcare, very limited. I was going to go for 2 years. Now that I know how it works, I would have just hired a lobbyist, but I was going to go for 2 years and change the law so this nonprofit would be able to do that. I was successful in that, but I got engaged. I got vice chair of healthcare committee. I'm on the Ways and Means Human Services, which is the largest budget that we do, and I enjoy it. There's a lot to it. One of the problems that we have in healthcare today is our commercial healthcare. The rates are double digit. It is hard for the mom and pops to go out and afford that. And the federal government said you got to buy healthcare. The state of Oregon said if you buy healthcare, we're going to tax it. I think there's other funding streams. I don't think that we should be taxing healthcare. The result of that tax on healthcare in Douglas County was lose providers. You now in Douglas County, if you're a mom and pop, you have one provider to go to buy healthcare from. You need options. It makes it very expensive. On the Medicaid side, why are we always having a funding crunch? The funding crunch, if you go back historically, and healthcare gets into the weeds, but if you go back in historically 10 years, the general fund budget was 21% of the Medicaid budget. Then the ACA came along, and that moved that up to about 8.5% because the federal government pays a bigger portion of it. As we look at our general funds, and this will be one of the arguments I believe that we will have in the legislature about the general fund amount of money into the Medicaid program that we have. In 2013 and 15, it was about 8.5%. The next biennium, they dropped it to 7.5%. The next biennium, which is the one that we're in, 7.2%, and now the governor has recommended that that drops to 6.7%. When you look at Oregon's major budgets, if you think about the education budget and you say, we're going to not even have a zero cost, if we're going to do a zero cost basis on that budget, what we do is current service level on every major budget in Oregon, except we don't do it on Medicaid. Why? Why don't we do a current service level budget for Medicaid? The healthcare tax did bring in an extra $300 million. You know what we're seeing in Oregon now? Is over a $600 million kicker. So I know those goes into different budgets and different silos and stuff, but what happened when you took $25 million out of schools, when you had college students paying for healthcare, when you go to one provider, one insurance in Douglas County, your rates go up, your cost goes up, we lose teachers in schools. That is not the answer, and now we have over a $600 million kicker. It's not the way to do it.
All right, end of round 3. Let's start round 4 and the final round, natural resources management. And we'll begin with Megan Salter.
For the last several summers, we have found ourselves unable to spend time outdoors in this beautiful nature that surrounds us because of our wildfires and the unhealthy air that just sits in the Umpqua Basin for days and days on end. We can't spend our time hiking in the forest and camping and hunting and fishing. Timber and wildfire are critical issues here in rural Oregon. As somebody who was not born and raised here, I may not have a long history with these issues, but I don't have any prejudices or alliances either. I am ready and willing to listen to experts from all sides of this issue to make informed decisions that benefit our entire community. So first we need to create a task force that brings everybody to the table. It gives everybody the time to discuss their side, their concerns, their solutions. And from that, we need a forestry industry that delivers a predictable volume of wood resources. It provides clean water, clean air, it restores our salmon runs, all while resisting forest fires. And yes, I know this is easier said than done. Here in the Umpqua, all of our players are local and invested, but I will be a moderator on this group so we can work together and find solutions that work for our entire area. For generations, timber has been the backbone of our economy, and for decades it has provided good, stable, living wage jobs. Unfortunately, so many of those jobs have been lost to automation. And so we need to think outside the box. We need to be innovative. We need to bring everybody to the table so that we can make these critical decisions for our area. We also need to work on thinning our forest and on logging so that we can create evacuation routes and fire breaks so that every summer our hardworking firefighters can actually get to these areas that are affected. We should also focus on shipping out wood or finished wood products, not just 2x4s, but we need to be shipping out tables and bookcases, quality wood furniture, which also provides us a new industry here. Also, rural communities are the best places to invest in clean energy. We can provide job training and apprenticeship programs. And we can also offer these to so many of the employees that have been forced out of the forestry industry because of automation. The Clean Energy Jobs Act has set aside money specifically for our rural areas. Let's use it. Let's reinvest in our communities. The fact of the matter is that in the upcoming years, the legislature will be making decisions on the timber tax, on the Forest Practices Act, on our fisheries. So let's make sure that we have an effective representative that is willing to listen from people from all sides and that is not taking money from special interest groups and corporate PACs, so that the decisions that are made are fair and balanced and they are best for everybody in our community.
All right, we'll go to Ms. Sousa.
I've been fortunate to have spent the last 20 years in part focusing on habitat conservation and restoration out on the coast and in the forest. A lot of that has been focused around salmon. We're kind of a salmon country out here. It's like our canary in the coal mine. If the salmon are healthy, then we're doing a good job. The salmon aren't healthy. We're not doing a good job. There are a lot of reasons for that. Forestry is one of those elements that we can talk about, and there are definitely some updates to our management plans that need to be made. On the federal side, clearly we need to get on board with some mega fire prevention planning. And we have in the upcoming years in 2020 finally access to federal funds to do just that. Instead of just fighting the wildfires, we'll actually be able to invest some funds in actively preventing those wildfires. We have timber operators, foresters, biologists, boots on the ground, local knowledge of our federal forests that have good ideas and perspectives that are based on local experience on how we might move forward into the future more effectively. Put some board feet into the mills, increase our fire resiliency while protecting our soils and keeping our waters clean for those salmon. Since that money is going to come up and available in 2020, I believe it behooves us in 2019 to get that group of people together to the table, along with the scientific best practices. So you bring in the best practices, you calibrate them with local resources and knowledge and experience, and we come forth with a strategic plan that we can all implement when the money is available. There are some examples of successful endeavors like that. The city of Ashland has recently undergone a strategic plan with that same goal in mind. Their forests look very different than our forests, but the strategic planning and that fostering of community buy-in is the same model that we can use in our federal forests. Sudden oak death isn't something that you talk about much over here yet. I hope it stays that way. there is a very effective, bipartisan, across-the-board forester, timber operator, and biologist group that has been convening at the federal and state level out on the coast that is a very effective model for how we can act together nimbly for a common cause. Ocean acidification is also something that might not feel as impactful here yet, but things are getting pretty desperate. Already we have oyster growers who can't harvest oysters from the ocean. With the acidification, we lose the capacity for animals to actually calcify the shells that they need. The recent report that was put on the governor's desk suggests that we might be 30 to 40 years from not being able to support ocean animals that grow shells on the Oregon coast. We have some real investment potential into research and development, into our educational institutions located on the coast, into effective measures that we can mitigate and adapt to ocean acidification. Finally, all of our rural Oregon communities are 100% reliant on imported energy. The advent of renewable energy generation and storage, distributed energy generation, is really something that we can sink our teeth into, invest in right now, and reduce our contributions to those same greenhouse gases.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cedric Hayden, would you go next?
Yeah, thank you. So natural resources is something that Oregon, and particularly Douglas County, they're huge here. And one of the things that has always been interesting to me in natural resources is when politics get involved, we have a hard time calling a spade a spade. For example, in our generation of electricity, we have hydropower. And if hydropower is produced after a certain date, then we call it clean energy. If it was built before a certain date, we don't add that to the clean energy mix. Well, why? It's still hydropower. When we have a lot of discussions in the legislature, and we always have this discussion, and I always bring it up, we talk about the carbon footprint. And I'm somebody that wants a good future for my children, for the legacy that we leave to the next generation. And when we look at these large wildfires and we calculate carbon footprint in Oregon and say there's so much carbon footprint, you know the biggest elephant in the room we always ignore? Wildfires. They say we don't count wildfires towards the carbon footprint because it's a natural disaster. And I always argue on those committees because they come through our healthcare committee. Wildfires are coming through our healthcare committee because it is a healthcare problem. It is a problem that is affecting our vulnerable citizens, whether that's the elderly or the young. Year after year, we're seeing an uptick in the health problems in the emergency rooms. You know, after you get into fire season, about 3 weeks, you can go get the data from the ER rooms and it starts to go up. So what I would like to see in the argument with natural resources is let's just call it what it is. When a wildfire emits a bunch of carbon, is there anything we can do to mitigate that? I believe there is. If you go back 20 or 30 years, we didn't have that as much. Now, part of it was because our forests were open access, and so if you take a grid and you have all these roads open that have 80 feet wide, then people like me don't have to go in and cut that gate open and rebuild that road. And when the lightning strike happens, it's going to burn that grid. What happens now is it goes boom, and it goes everywhere. Those logging roads are no longer open. That grid is no longer there. So we need to go back in and put that grid so when the natural disaster happens, it's in a small area. As far as the environment, our forests are our best carbon sink. It's wonderful. What we need to do is manage that. I've been on many fires that are either federal or state managed. And there is literally, love to show you some pictures, literally a barbed wire fence between this private timber stand and this was Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, 400-year-old ponderosa pines that over 30 years wasn't managed, and that undergrowth made it so hot it killed those 300-year-old pines. 300, 400 years. These things were bigger than my arm could stretch. They died. Why? Why didn't the ones over here on the neighbor who also had old trees, but it was managed, they didn't die at all? They got scorched a little bit. It didn't get to a crown fire. It didn't get to that heat. But that 140 acres of our Oregon's land was killed. 400 years of history there. So my point is, until we have the political will to call a spade, to call carbon emission wherever it comes from, we have a political problem with natural resources more than an actual problem, but we can fix the actual problem.
All right, thank you. And now Christy Inskip, please.
Thank you. We all deserve to breathe clean air and drink clean water, free of chemicals that can make us sick. We all want the same prosperous future for our children and our grandchildren. We want them to be economically successful and have healthy environments to live, work, and play in. We need to make sure we preserve and responsibly manage our forests, our great outdoor environment, including our wildlife and our fish, so we and our children and our grandchildren can continue to enjoy them. Our rivers, lakes, streams, through hiking, hunting, and fishing. As a public health professional with an environmental health background, I have spent my career working to protect children, sensitive populations, and workers from chemicals that can make them sick in their environments where they live, work, and recreate. Climate change is a real threat to our physical and economic health. Due to climate change, we often need to make a trade-off between good-paying jobs and our environment. We need a timber industry that we can be proud of, that provides good-paying jobs. It used to be that timber would employ a full crew of people, but now due to automation and mechanization, one person can go through a forest with a joystick and cut half a forest in a day. Because of this, we actually have massive increase in board feet production, but without the job growth. We need to take climate change into account when looking at our natural resources. When managing them, we need to use natural resources in a sustainable way that protects our clean air and water. And we need to diversify our economy with 21st century jobs, and that includes clean energy jobs. We need to manage our forests in a sustainable way. We need wood products. We also need to sustain our forests for our future generations. We need healthy forests for wildlife habitat, hiking, hunting, fishing. We should selectively harvest and not clear cut. And we must diversify. We should do a better job of diversifying our economy and creating 21st century jobs that will not hurt our natural resources. There are opportunities to create a diverse amount of jobs that help and not hurt our environment. With our current inability to consistently recycle, we could create a recycling plant right here in Douglas County. That's just one idea. This could create jobs, they're high paying, and it's good for the environment. We need to create clean energy jobs. Like many factors in our communities, climate change disproportionately affects communities that are already experiencing inequities. Clean energy jobs will help reduce these environmental inequities, provide a living wage for folks, increase local renewable energy, improve our air quality, our water quality, protect the health of our families and communities, and boost our economy. We also need to make sure that any workers who become displaced by clean energy jobs will be compensated and receive job training. The effects of greenhouse gases are expensive, and the largest emitters should be held accountable and have to pay at least a portion of what they are costing our communities. We need to combat climate change and protect our natural resources. We should create a cap and invest system, look at a carbon tax, and do more to protect our precious drinking water and fish habitat.
All right, thank you very much. That was very interesting, all of you. And that concludes our formal part of this forum, Candidates Fair. And now I would suggest that you candidates pick a spot in the room and your constituents will come talk to you. And you can answer your questions then. And remember, there's coffee and tea in the back. And so thank you very much, candidates. Thank you, audience, for being here.